Welcome to Another Round, a podcast by the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Itchon. In today's episode, our guest is Steve Moore, Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Project for Economic Growth. He's also, along with economist Larry Kudlow, the architect of the Trump tax plan. Steve spoke to PRI supporters at the Maritime Wine Bar in North Beach, San Francisco. But before his talk, he sat down with me to give his thoughts on the current economy, the challenge of getting tax reform passed this fall, and how the tax plan might affect Californians. Later in Last Call, I'll be joined by Tim Anaya, PRI's Director of Communications, and Wayne Weingarten, PRI's Senior Fellow in Economic Studies, as we give our take on Steve's comments on the Trump plan. Welcome to Another Round, Steve. The jobs report was strong, the stock market was up, GDP was well over the 1.8% growth we've averaged since 2000. Is the Trump effect real?
There is a Trump effect here, and I think it's pretty pronounced, and I think it began literally the day after the election. Remember when the stock market went up 700 points, one of the biggest one-day rallies ever, and I think that's because two things. One is that Trump is just pro-business, and as my friend Larry Kudlow says, when Trump was elected, the war against business under Obama was over. And so part of it is just stopping the bad things that were happening, the tax increases, the regulations, the increase in debt and spending, and all of those things that had a very negative effect on the economy. The second factor at play here is that there's what I call the anticipation effect of good things to come. Tax reduction, regulatory reduction, the anticipation that there was the anticipation that we were going to get rid of Obamacare. Whether that happens now as we speak is up in the air. A pro-America energy policy, and Donald Trump is really big on producing American oil and gas and coal, and those things all would be very positive for the economy. By the way, just to correct one little thing you said, if you look at the economy in 2016, Obama's last year in office, it grew only 1.5%, which is barely staying out of recession. 2.6% is not a great number, but it's a good number, and it's a hell of a lot better than 1.5. So we were barely staying out of recession. In fact, a lot of people thought we were headed into another recession when Obama left office.
Steve, so that leads me to the question of President Trump's target for the GNP of 4%. Is that still on track?
I think that Donald Trump is wholly committed to that. This was something that Larry Kudlow, who's a good friend of PRI as well, and of CNBC fame, and we both recommended to Donald Trump that you could achieve 4% for a few years if he got the policies right. And Donald Trump was great. He'd always say, 4%? I think we can get 5%. So, look, I do think 3 to 3.5%, maybe 4% is achievable for a short time. We way underperformed economically during Bush and during Obama, so we're way under trend. I've always said 3 or 4 years of 4% growth is possible, but that means Trump is going to have to enact the agenda. He's going to have to get Obamacare repealed. He's going to have to get the tax cut done. He's going to have to promote American energy. And the one thing that has really picked up the economy so far and really elevated the growth rate has been the deregulation. That's been amazing. I mean, Trump came in and he just ground to a halt all of the regulations, with very few exceptions, that are inhibiting growth of the economy. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was working for Trump he had a council of business leaders during the campaign, and there were one or two economists who were involved in that, and I was one of them. And Trump used to go around the table and ask these 20 leaders of transportation companies, manufacturing companies, financial services companies, banking companies, and he'd say, what is the biggest impediment to you growing your business faster in your company? And I thought they were going to say taxes, but most of them said regulations is killing us. So the regulatory halt has been a big plus, and I think it's one of the reasons Trump deserves some credit for the pickup of the economy.
What about corporate tax rates? Do you see that as a priority for the administration, or personal income tax rates?
Oh, it's the business rates, for sure. Larry Kudlow and I helped put the Trump tax plan together during the campaign. The business tax cut was the heart of the plan, and that's where we believe we get a lot of the juice from cutting our business rates. And the people who are members of PRI don't need to be told this, because I'm sure you all know this, but the highest business tax rates in the world, and that just makes America uncompetitive. That doesn't work anymore. We're uncompetitive right now, and it's almost like it's a Head Start program for all the countries that we compete with. We're at a 40% corporate rate. Most of the rest of the world's around 20. France is talking about, their new president in France is now talking about cutting their corporate rate. This is an imperative. One thing Trump used to say when we'd mention these business tax rates, which he said it on several occasions, he said, yes, I do want to cut the corporate rate. I get this, he said, but I want to make sure if we cut the corporate rate, that lower tax rate is available to every small businessman and woman in America. And there, as you know, there are 26.5 million small businesses in this economy. They would get a tax cut too. We do have the intention at some point of simplifying the tax system for individuals as well. And there's economic benefit to doing that. We can bring rates down and broaden the base as Ronald Reagan did. You worked for Ronald Reagan. You worked for the Gipper. You remember when we did that. We haven't done tax reform in 30 years since Reagan was in office. So it's time to do that. But I think for this year, I think we're really concentrating on getting the business tax cut done.
What about switching to territorial taxes?
I'm not personally a big advocate of a territorial tax system. My view is if we had a lower tax rate, it wouldn't be an issue. The territorial tax is important if you have a high tax rate because, then businesses, if they want to bring capital back to the United States, they have to pay the difference between what they pay in the country they're in. Let's say Ireland, which is 12.5%, and a U.S. rate, which is 40%, they'd have to pay like a 25% tax to bring it back to the United States. My point is that if you bring the corporate tax rate down, companies won't have an incentive to relocate overseas in the first place, when it comes to taxes. The other point to make is, what we want to do, a big part of our plan is the repatriation. We estimate there's about $2 trillion overseas of money that could be brought back to the United States, but is sitting in China or Canada or Ireland or these other countries. We want to bring that back. We're going to charge them a 10% tax rate, one time only. We think we can bring about $1 trillion back. That's $100 billion of revenues to the government. Plus, it's $1 trillion invested in California or Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania. It's good for America and it's good for the Treasury. As I see it, it's a win-win.
Let's talk about spending cuts. The administration brought a budget to Congress earlier this year. I don't get a sense that there's an appetite for cutting entitlements or any sort of spending.
Yeah, well, what Congress has there been an appetite for cutting spending? Not very many. I remember when Newt Gingrich took Congress in '95, we did cut spending back then. And by the way, when the Republicans took Congress in 2010, we actually brought the big spending bulge under Obama to a halt. But I don't think this Congress is too intent on cutting spending too much. My view is if you want to get the deficit under control, obviously you need to control your expenditures, just as any business does. But we got to grow. And one of the reasons so many states, we're sitting here in beautiful downtown San Francisco, beautiful, wonderful state. California has budget problems. My home state of Illinois has budget problems. Connecticut does. New York does. You go down the road. Half of the states are in budget crisis right now. Now, why is that? Partly because they overspend, but the main reason is the U.S. economy isn't growing fast enough to generate the revenues. So my view is get growth up to 3 to 4%, and all of a sudden you're going to see states with more revenues, localities more revenues. The federal government will have more revenues. We cannot balance this budget with spending cuts alone. We need to get the growth rate up. And, when you're growing 1.5% per year, as we did under Obama, is it any wonder that we added $10 trillion to the U.S. debt?
Talk about jobs. Unemployment right now is about 4.3%, but the job participation rate is stubbornly,
really low.
It stayed the same for, what do you think is going to get competing on jobs again?
That's a great question. I believe a couple things. First of all, the real unemployment rate, is the headline unemployment rate, you're right, is 4.3. But when you include people who dropped out of the workforce or people they weren't looking for a job, the real unemployment rate is probably closer to 7 or 8%. I'm a big believer that we can induce a lot of people, between the ages of 20 and 65 back into the workforce. You need a growing workforce to have a higher growth rate. Now, what do you have to do to make that possible? You need to, economics is all about incentives, right? This is what Milton Friedman taught us. So you have to increase the benefit of working and you have to reduce the benefit of not working, right? So we spend $1 trillion a year at the federal level paying people not to work through welfare programs, food stamps and unemployment insurance and disability payments and public housing, all of this stuff. That discourages work. There's just no question about it, in my opinion. I think what I've recommended to Trump is every single welfare program, if you're able-bodied, you should have to work in exchange for those benefits. We're a generous country. Nobody should go homeless. Nobody should go hungry. Children should be well-fed and well cared for. But if you're an adult and you're collecting a welfare check, we should, as a society, expect something in return for you. And by the way, getting somebody a job is the best thing you can do. It's much better than a handout. Second of all, you have to cut taxes, because guess what? When you cut taxes, then your paycheck increases, right? The government's taking less out of it. So increase the reward to work and decrease the rewards of not working. So I do believe we've got probably 5, 6, 7 million people that we could continue to induce into the workforce, and that would help the economy grow, and it would benefit families and everyone.
Look at this trend of raising the minimum wage. In San Francisco right now, the minimum wage is $14 an hour.
What is it, 14?
$14 an hour. And even at PRI, we decided not to hire interns this summer, because at $14 an hour, we could hardly afford that. That's about a $5,000 salary for the intern for the summer.
Yeah, I want Americans to have the highest wage possible. I want us to be the highest wage country in the world. I want people to get pay raises, but it doesn't happen by the government just waving a wand, right? You have to have more productivity, you have to have a tighter labor force. So, by the way, wages are starting to rise under Trump, because as you get a tighter labor market, as you get more people looking for workers, guess what? That bids up the wage. So that is the important thing to do. But the idea, I've heard people advocating a $15 minimum wage for the nation. That's the Democrats called for that. That's craziness. You're in San Francisco. Even you said that. What is your $14 now? That's a hardship for a lot of businesses. But it's a $14 an hour minimum wage in San Francisco, where you've got a high wage area with a lot of economic activity. It wouldn't be the end of the world. But I tell you, you go to Mississippi or Louisiana or Arkansas and you propose a $14 minimum wage, are you crazy? You put millions of workers out of work. So I don't, and by the way, I've always advocated, if we are going to raise the minimum wage federally, which I'm not in favor of, but if we do, we ought to have a teen minimum wage, or somebody, anybody under the age of, say, 21, 22, let them work for $6, $7 an hour. My first job was $2.10 an hour.
I think mine was too. We're about the
Back
same
in the late
age,
70s,
right,
yeah. And I learned a lot from my first job, and you want to get people in the workforce. So I'm not a big fan of the minimum wage. I think it's a dumb policy. I think it destroys jobs for people who want to get into the workforce. You can't have a second or third job until you have a first job. I hope people are enjoying the music, by the way, in the background. We are in this wonderful, wine store where we're celebrating PRI, and I'm here to give a little talk. So that if you're listening to the music in the background, that's just some of the preparation for the big event.
Turn to California's economy. Part of the president's tax plan is to take away itemized deductions for state and local income taxes and possibly property tax. Californians are in a high tax state. Do you think this would pass?
I think that, first of all, let me say this. California, I hate to sort of say this because I know most of the people listening to this are in California, but I'm just not high on the California economy. I would not bet on it because your taxes and regulations are just too high and you're uncompetitive relative to other states. So everybody says how wonderful the California economy is doing. Well, wait a minute. Over the last 10 years, almost 1.5 million more Americans left California than came into California. You're losing your resources, which is your people and the brain power that goes with it. You do. You have a high poverty rate. You also have a high income inequality in California, so it's a great place if you're really rich, and it's you have high welfare benefits for people who are poor. You're losing your middle class. So I am not high on California. In fact, I'm really bearish on California. I think that unless the tax rates are brought down and the regulations become more less onerous, you're not going to see a vibrant future. And California, you've lived here now a long time. It's a boom and bust cycle. You're in a boom cycle right now, but these things don't last forever and then they bust. So if I were if I were Jerry Brown, I would advocate a flat tax. Remember, he was for a flat tax when he ran for president. Why not a 5 or 6% flat tax on income? Get rid of all the deductions and just everybody paid their fair share. Now, can we get rid of the state and local tax deduction? I hope so. I think it's the dumbest tax deduction in the code. All we do with allowing people to deduct their state and local income taxes is we reward high tax states, like my home state of Illinois, like here in California, like states like New York. You have a 13.5% income tax. But guess what? For people at the very top, they get to write off 40% of that at the federal. So the real effect of that is like a 9% rate. The other federal taxpayers paying for that. That's not fair to people outside of California, and so we should get rid of it. Can we get rid of it? I hope so, but it's going to be a tough lift.
Let me ask you about Obamacare. What are the chances of getting real repeal and replace? And now there's a bipartisan effort. What do you make of that, and do you think that...
Well, first of all, kudos for all the great work you do at PRI on healthcare. I mean, amazing stuff. And Sally is just one of my heroes. So, Sally Pipes is one of the great experts on healthcare. She's warned us of what would happen if we went to a more government-run controlled system, and she knows, having been from Canada, and it is not a pretty picture. So thank you for PRI's great work on this. I still think we can get something done as we speak. It's just a few weeks from when the Republicans only got 49 votes. That was a painful night. I was on CNN that night when John McCain came into the chamber and nobody knew what he was going to do, and he voted no. And I've always been a big admirer of John McCain because he's a great American hero. But I have to say, I was very disappointed with him. I thought he stabbed his Republican colleagues in the back. So I still think we might be able to get that last Republican vote. Maybe Lisa Murkowski. You know, Alaska's gotten killed by Obamacare. Why would she vote to preserve it? What I would favor, by the way, is just a minimalist form that we could do right now that would have a big effect. Just let people opt out of Obamacare and just buy it. And I know PRI has advocated this, and this is something Ted Cruz has been talking about. If you like Obamacare, you get to keep it. But if you want a cheaper policy that can cover your family's needs, you get that. And, you know, if you do that, the really the secret, that will destroy Obamacare. Because, you know, you got tens of millions of people, I don't want this. You know, it's supposed to be affordable. It's not affordable. And you'll get a vibrant healthcare market. We don't have a health insurance market. We got, according to the Congressional Budget Office, I hate to quote them because they've been so wrong, but they've been saying about 40%. I'm sorry, I just misspoke. It's not the CBO. It's the Centers on Medicaid and Medicare. They say that 40% of Americans next year, if we don't change Obama, 40%, almost half, Americans will be in a county with either no insurance company or only one insurance company. That means they have no choice whatsoever. I want to end on an upbeat note. I really do think the economy is surging right now. And I think over the next 6 months to a year, we're going to see an increase in acceleration in the growth rate. I think we're on the verge of a real period of prosperity, and I think this is attributed to a lot of the Trump policy. My favorite drink is the mimosa. I mean, I just can't start my Sunday morning without a mimosa every morning. So, but thank you for having me. I love the work that PRI does. You are indispensable to helping grow the California economy, and I got to tell you, in Washington, D.C., we take your advice very close held because we think you do some of the best quality research. And I say this as somebody who's worked at Cato and Heritage and so many of the think tanks. It is such good stuff, and for those people who are donors to PRI, I just want to applaud you for helping a group that is really helping make America a better and freer and more prosperous country.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you.
In our last call segment, Wayne Weingarten, PRI Senior Fellow in Economic Studies, and Tim Anaya, Director of Communications, and I give our take on Steve's comments on the Trump plan. Let's start with Wayne.
Steve has done some really important work over the years about connecting the policy environment to growth. I mean, he's one of the economists that actually gets it. And so one of the most important takeaways from what Steve was talking about, the importance of tax reform, the importance of getting the regulatory structure right. We've been doing it wrong for so long that Steve's perspective in terms of getting a flat tax, beginning to control spending, getting growth back, and the importance of growth to solving some of our fiscal problems. These are important issues that politicians need to understand, that people, when they're voting, they need to understand. And so that raising that was just so important.
You know, I think one of the things that I found interesting listening to his interview was you really appreciate what complex issues we're dealing with here with tax reform. And, you know, despite what the president and our congressional leaders say, it really isn't easier said than done. You know, we have experience in California about 10 years ago when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. They had this big commission, the Parsky Commission. And the thinking was, you know, we're going to get all these experts and all different sides of the aisle in the room, and we're going to come up with a consensus on tax reform. And they did all this work and held all these hearings and came up with this blue ribbon report of here's what the tax reform plan should be. And then it was shelved and has pretty much just sat on the shelf ever since. You know, everyone picked it to death as soon as it was released. And I wonder, whatever they come up with in Washington, I wonder if it very well might meet the same fate. state.
That's the risk, right? The special interests, they have tax breaks in there for a reason, and it's important to them, and they're going to not give an inch. And it's kind of a classic public choice theory, but when you have kind of a concentrated benefit, that those special interests are going to be more intense in fighting for those perks, and the general interest is going to be minimized. And we see it for California, we see it at the federal level, and we need to come up with a method to overcome that. We haven't yet, at least not since 1986.
I thought the other interesting point that I think is a real challenge is these issues of how it's going to affect the different states, like that California, getting rid of the ability to deduct your state property taxes or your state income taxes, whatever it was. That's a huge political risk for any member of Congress to go for something like that hurts their home state.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, there shouldn't be a deduction for state and local taxes. But Californians will be hurt by that. Californians are overtaxed, but right now Virginians are subsidizing that. And so if you're a Californian, why would you vote against it? It doesn't make sense.
The thing is that, we're a blue state, Wayne, and I don't know if the administration or Congress will care about California as much as maybe they'll care more about Texas or some of the red states. But for the most part, a lot of blue states have high taxes.
Well, I think you have the solution to at least the state and local tax deduction, which made some of these possible, right? So few states benefit. I forget the exact figure, 50% of the state and local tax deduction benefit is in California and New York alone. So if you lose those states, but you can pick up blue states where they're getting harmed, maybe there's a coalition that could help move some of these tax reforms forward.
I guess I always equate it to, I love listening to these car guys on the radio on the weekend, and people always call up and ask, different things about what should my trade-in value be, or what kind of rebates and credit should we get. And I guess it comes down to, and he always gives the advice, who cares what the trade-in value is of the car? What matters is, at the end of the day, what's your bottom line price? And I think you can kind of equate that to tax reform. Say we lose the ability to deduct our state income taxes, but if in the long run it's a good deal for me, the bottom line is really what should matter at the end of the day.
Absolutely. That's well put.
One thing that I'm concerned about is the stock market. During the campaign trail, when the Dow was at 18,000, candidate Trump called it a bubble. Now that the Dow is at 22,000, he's calling it the Trump rally. So I think the expectation for tax reform, especially lower corporate tax rates, is so baked into this current rally. And if the administration and Congress don't come through, I think we could see a serious correction in the market. And given the expansion, it's pretty long in the tooth now, and we've got a pretty fragile economy. Do you think that we could be headed for recession if tax reform doesn't come through?
Yes, absolutely. And we could even be headed for a recession with, or at least a mild recession with tax reform if interest rate policy doesn't go the right way or other factors. There's lots of risks out there, and it's scary. So the most important thing is get as many policies correct as quickly as possible. But without tax reform, the stock market has priced in a tremendous amount of probability that it could happen. And we've seen 1,000-point movements, right, when people became negative about tax reform. And the other issue, of course, is interest rates. As interest rates go up, that is going to be bearish for the stock market. So if the Fed continues on its path, the stock market is facing lots of headwind where, you're already at lofty values for profits. You have tax reform priced in, which may or may not happen, and you have low interest rates priced in. And if that starts to rise, you could have a lot of headwinds against the stock market.
Let's try to end it a positive note, guys.
Yeah, seriously. The positive note is, and I think Steve hit this, and this was just so important, is number one, stop the regulatory onslaught. Steve just hit it out of the park with that. It is so important to, businesses across the board. The number one complaint is always regulations. And so just knowing that the regulatory onslaught has stopped, that is an important positive for the economy. And as we start to look at these deregulatory processes and start allowing the oil and gas industry and the fracking industries to make the contributions that they can make, and as we start to hopefully lower lower some of the costs on small businesses, that is a great positive for the economy. And if we can leverage that, there's very hopeful signs for the future.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Tim. Thanks to our guests Steve Moore and Wayne Weingarten, and of course Tim Anaya. To stay up to date with PRI, visit our brand new website at pacificresearch.org. Mark your calendars for PRI's annual gala on November 1st, 2017. Our keynote speaker is none other than Silicon Valley entrepreneur Peter Thiel. And if you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to Another Round with PRI at iTunes, Google Play, and please do us a favor and leave us positive feedback and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast at PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/PacificResearch1. That's the number 1. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, I'm Rowena Itchon. We hope you'll come back again for Another Round with PRI.